Welcome back to another 2023 NFL mock draft. Now, the combine is behind us, which I was actually at in person, and I have a video about that on my main channel if you want to go check that out. This mock draft is going to be a little bit different than my first mock draft because, like I said before, in my initial mock, there was no trades, there was no really movement of any kind. It was just kind of take what I think was going to be the selections at the time. And with that being said, here we are. The Chicago Bears are on the clock. And now we know there were some risers and some fallers with the combine. What really does the combine matter? Not that much, in my opinion. So it's not going to make too much of a difference in terms of how I rated my players in the last mock. But we'll see a little bit different stuff going down here. So let's get right into it. Now, the first thing we will be doing here is a trade for the number one overall pick. Because at this point in the year, it's basically a foregone conclusion that the number one overall pick will not be selected by the Chicago Bears. Whether that be a huge, colossal trade like we've seen before, or whether that be a smaller trade, maybe to like 2 to the Texans or 4 even to the Colts or 7 to the Raiders. I personally believe there are only 3 teams that would be willing to trade up to number 1, and those are the ones that I just mentioned. Houston, Indianapolis, and Las Vegas. Now, a lot of you may be asking, Houston, they have the number 2 overall pick. Why would they move up? Well, because they might, and I'm not saying they will, they might have a quarterback that they absolutely love, and they kind of just like the other ones. So then you would trade up because you're only going one spot. You're probably going to have to give up like a second rounder next year or something like that, maybe even less, maybe even a third next year. For the Bears to move down one spot, they get a little bit more capital for that trade. Do I think that's what's going to happen? Possibly, but probably not, and it will not be happening in this mock draft today. Unfortunately, Texans fans, or fortunately, Texans fans, I don't know what you guys think, but you guys are staying at 2 here in this mock. Now, the next team that I mentioned before is the Indianapolis Colts. Now, this team makes a lot of sense, in my opinion, because they're just at 4. It's not going to take a ton to move up to 1. You'd probably have to give up a next year 1 and a little bit of change, maybe like a 3 from this year or next, depending. But that's not horrible, in my opinion, when it comes down to what you have to give up to go get that quarterback. Now, here is where things get kind of dicey, I guess you could say. Because the next team is the Las Vegas Raiders. They're sitting at number 7 overall. The Raiders are more of a team that needs a quarterback and a little bit of everything else to be a really good team next year. They're not horrible. They have Devontae Adams. They have a solid O-line. Their defense definitely needs some help, but they got some good pass rushers over there, and Max Crosby and Chandler Jones is still pretty solid. But they need some help. So the Raiders are a team that I could see trading up, but I'm not so sure because of the fact that they do need so many other pieces. The Colts are not going to be trading up in today's mock draft. That might happen later on, but today we will be having the Las Vegas Raiders trade up to the number 1 overall selection. And now, the real reason that I'm doing this is because the Raiders are coached by ex-Patriot Josh McDaniels, who runs a similar system as Bill O'Brien, who is now the Patriots OC, who was also the Alabama OC last year when Bryce Young was the quarterback. So it would make a lot of sense, in my opinion, for Josh McDaniels to say, let's go get the quarterback that I know for a fact can run this offense and be better than Bryce Young was last year. He's got all the upside. He doesn't have very much downside. Obviously, he's a little, slight and short here. But that's the knock on him. Those are the only knocks on him, realistically. So I think Vegas moves up from the 7th overall selection to the 1st overall selection, giving the Chicago Bears some more capital to go get some guys for Justin Fields and what they got at quarterback. So, of course, the number 1 swap here is 7 for 1. Then we're going to add 38 as well. The Raiders are going to keep 70. We're going to take 109. We're going to get next year's 1 and 2. And then we're going to get 2025 3 as well. I think this is a solid package to go get your QB1. 2 1s, 2 2s, a 3 and a 4. Pretty similar to what Mitch Trubisky got a few years ago. Obviously, that was a bit more of a move up or a bit less of a move up, I should say, because they only moved up to pick 3. But I really don't see in this mock draft, the other 2 teams weren't super interested. I think Houston would be okay with sitting at 1, or at 2, I should say, because worst case scenario, they also have the chance to get a great defensive player. And they can go ahead and go, we'll punt on the season. We'll get our quarterback next year when there's a much better class, and they know they're going to be a bad team. The issue with that is I think Houston, in my opinion, loves Bryce Young and likes everybody else. The same situation that the Raiders have. However, the Raiders are willing to give up a lot more, and the Bears are okay with moving down to 7 because they stay in the top 10 picks. They still get a top 10 talent. Then they get a 2 this year, a 4 this year, a 1 and a 2 next year, and a 3 the following year. Whereas Houston wasn't really willing to give up all that. Now, Chicago makes this trade happen. They are now picking at number 7 overall, and the Las Vegas Raiders are now picking at 1. So here's the conundrum that the Texans are about to have. The Raiders are about to take the guy that they love, Bryce Young, from Alabama. Quarterback, off the board, number 1 overall selection, to Las Vegas. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. Does Houston say, okay, let's take C.J. Stroud? He's a good quarterback. He is pro-ready. I mean, why not, right? I feel like he would make a lot of sense there. But the question that I have, if I'm Houston, is C.J. Stroud better than either Caleb Williams or Drake May next year? No. Is he as good? There's potential, but not as a prospect. I would say right now both of those guys are better prospects. But nothing is for sure and nothing is certain. And as a Houston Texans, if I were the Houston Texans GM, I would be looking at it like, I really like C.J. Stroud. I think he's a very good quarterback. I think he could do very good for us. But then there's Anthony Richardson there too, from Florida, who is a beast athletically, but he's got some issues. He probably won't start year 1. Here's where it gets fun. There are rumblings that the Houston Texans will be signing Jimmy Garoppolo to a 1 or 2 year deal. With that being said, wouldn't it make sense for Houston to go ahead and get Anthony Richardson? I sure think so. Because if you're a team like Houston, worst case scenario, you draft him, he doesn't play next year, and then you're back at pick 1 and you have a conundrum of, do we draft another quarterback at 1? Do we trade down? Because you haven't seen really Anthony Richardson play yet. So, with that being said, I think the Houston Texans would go ahead and select, this is really tough, man, but I genuinely believe in this moment the Texans would take Anthony Richardson at number 2 overall because of the ridiculous upside, the fact that they might be signing Jimmy Garoppolo, and they're a team that can, not necessarily lose the 2nd overall pick, but next year they're not going to be very good either. So Anthony Richardson, he might even be able to start, halfway through the year, and then you can see what you got with him. But with the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo is likely to sign there, from what I've heard, I'm going to go with that. And this is also, if Lamar's returning to Baltimore, off the script, I'm just going to say he's returning to Baltimore. I'm not trying to get into a bunch of hypotheticals with that. So, the only real hypothetical I have here is Jimmy G signs with the Texans. Now at 3, the Cardinals, they have a real potential here to trade down because a lot of teams might want to hop over the Colts to get a quarterback. Maybe, a team like Carolina, I could see trading up to 3. The thing here, though, is there's really not much that... This isn't a very top-heavy class. Will Anderson, I think, and Jalen Carter are the only 2 left that you're like, okay, these guys are really good. Tyree Wilson is of that same cloth, but I think he's just a little bit worse than those 2. But here's the thing. Will Anderson plays edge. He's a very good edge player, but that's all he really plays is edge. He can't move inside and play 3 or 5 tech. Whereas a guy like Tyree Wilson has the size to play 5 tech, or the size to play 3 tech even, with 285. I know last time I had the Cardinals taking Tyree Wilson. But right here, I am going to have the Carolina Panthers trading up to the 3rd overall selection with the Arizona Cardinals because they can trade up and get either CJ Stroud or Will Levis and have a quarterback for next year. Now, the problem here is the Colts are going to get caught in a weird position because they're one of the teams that need a quarterback the most. So with that being said, are they going to get jumped here by Carolina, or would they try to move up, or would they sit tight and just see what happens? Because I think the Colts are on the opposite spectrum of Houston, where they don't necessarily love one quarterback, but they like them all a little bit. And I think that anybody really could fit in this scenario, but with the way this mock draft is going to go down, the Carolina Panthers are going to move up to the 3rd overall selection. So with that being said, they have picks 9, 39, 61, and 93 in the first 3 rounds. So 9 and 39 for 3, along with their next year 1 and a 2025 2 for the 3rd overall selection, because that is still a pretty good jump, and that way and we're going to give pick 132 as well. But that way you don't have to give up so much in this draft. You give up next year's 1 and a 2 the year after. Then you get, basically the Cardinals are getting a 1st, 2nd, and 4th rounder this year, a 1st the year after, and a 2nd the year after, to move down about 6 picks. I don't think it's horrible. Now, the problem with that is there's not a lot of teams looking to trade up. So if you're the Cardinals and you really want to trade down, you're going to take this trade because you want to move down and there's not much value that you can get. And now you just took a team that's rebuilding, added a 1st rounder next year and a 2nd round the year after, along with a 1st and a 2nd this year. It's not bad. Now, here's the thing. Who do the Carolina Panthers select here? I am going to go ahead and take CJ Stroud now because that's the guy I really like. That's the guy I think the Panthers would trade up for in this situation because they don't really have a quarterback other than Sam Darnold, which maybe would be a reason why they take a guy like Will Levis or Anthony Richardson. But I genuinely believe that CJ Stroud is the better quarterback. And I think Carolina is more in a position to win than most people think. So I think trading up for CJ Stroud makes a lot of sense here. Now, Indianapolis, Will Levis. I think this is the guy that they have to take. They might not love Levis, but I think they like Levis. And I like Levis. I don't love him, though. And I think he's a solid fit here in Seattle. Now, this is where the draft gets fun. Because you've got a team like Seattle. Jalen Carter, Will Anderson, Devin Witherspoon, Tyree Wilson are all on the board right now. Now, here's where I think Seattle would go. I think clearly, without the off-the-field concerns, without the, legal issues that he's going through right now, Jalen Carter's clearly the pick here at 5. And he probably gets selected earlier, if not for all the trade-ups and the, misdemeanor that he's facing right now. With that being said, I think Seattle would take a guy like Will Anderson. I just think it makes a lot of sense because they need edge players. He's the best edge player in this class. Tyree Wilson could fit there too, but I don't think they run more of a 4-3 than a 3-4. So I think Will Anderson fits a little bit better, and that's going to be the pick at 5. So here is my Detroit Lions, as you can see, and I'm really not sure where to go with this pick right here because Jalen Carter has the off-field issues. I'm not going to go with him. Devin Witherspoon, though, could be solid. Tyree Wilson could be solid. Christian Gonzalez could be solid. And I don't think there's anybody here right now that anybody would want to trade up for. So the Lions are kind of stuck in this situation. There's no quarterbacks left to take either. So we're kind of stuck in a situation where we have to take a defensive player. And don't get me wrong, I do love Devin Witherspoon. I also really love Christian Gonzalez. Here's the thing for me. Devin didn't run, so his 40 time isn't even known. So he could run a 4.4, which he might run. He would probably run high 4.4s, not low 4.4s necessarily. But Christian Gonzalez is 6'1", over 205 plus, I believe, 210. He's really good in coverage in general. He can cover man, can cover zone. The difference, though, I think, is that Christian Gonzalez isn't the greatest in press. And that is going to be an issue because the Lions actually were one of the most press teams in the NFL. I think it was over 90% of their coverage snaps were in press. So, with that being said, I am going to take the fan favorite, Lions, love him, Devin Witherspoon here at 6. I know last time I took Gonzalez, but that's because I really like Gonzalez, and I think I would take Gonzalez. But in this situation, I think the Lions would take Witherspoon. He's more of a, scrappy guy. He's going to do everything you want for him. He's like a Swiss Army knife. He can play, slot and outside. Not to say Gonzalez can't do that, but I think Witherspoon's just more of a physical, tough corner, and he's more of what we look for in the locker room. Although Christian Gonzalez would make a lot of sense too because he's the same locker room fit. I don't think either of them have issues. I just think Witherspoon is a little bit better of a fit right now, in my opinion. But again, it could go either way, and I honestly would not be mad at either pick. I would be completely fine with Witherspoon or Gonzalez if all the quarterbacks are gone. The Chicago Bears are sitting here at pick number 7. And the guys, Jalen Carter, Tyree Wilson, are still on the board. Christian Gonzalez is still here, of course. Peter Skoronski's still here. Paris Johnson's still here. Those are all guys that I could definitely see them going with. However, the Chicago Bears, I think it's pretty clear that the Chicago Bears would go defense here. The question is, would they take the risk on Jalen Carter? I think they would, and I think there's a very good reason for it. Because worst case scenario is he goes to jail. That's legitimately the worst case scenario. But the best case scenario is he gets some fines, he has probation or whatever, and then he plays this season. I think personally that Jalen Carter is a very good player, probably the best defensive player in the class, maybe second behind Will Anderson. But Tyree Wilson's a very good player. He can play edge, he can play inside, and he doesn't have the off-field issues. So that's where it really gets tough for me, because do you go, Jalen Carter is the better player right now, but Tyree Wilson does have a lot of, potential. He's 6'6", 285. He can play, like I said, anywhere from 3 to 7 tech. Jalen Carter's more of a 3 or a 5 tech, and he's got the off-field issues. So with that being said, I'm going to go with Tyree Wilson here to the Chicago Bears at the 7th overall pick. And now the Bears got a player that they probably, not Tyree Wilson specifically, but they would have been happy with at 1. Will Anderson, Jalen Carter, Tyree Wilson, I think are all, like I said before, in the same tier of player. So trading from 1 to 7 and getting basically the same guy that you would get at 1, beautiful mastery by the Chicago Bears here. And now at 8, we have the Atlanta Falcons on the clock. And this one is tough because this is kind of where I'm looking for Jalen Carter, because I'm like, okay, this makes a lot of sense for the Falcons to do because they need defensive line help. Again, they're a team like the Bears that worst case scenario, he doesn't play for a year. And then, it's not like it's the worst thing. It's basically a redshirt year. I'm not saying it's okay that he went to jail. I'm just saying if you're looking at it from a strict on-field perspective, that's what you would do. But the fact that the Atlanta Falcons have not re-signed Caleb McGarry or franchise tagged him is a big telling sign to me that they probably are going to go offensive line at 8. And I think this makes a lot of sense because there is a decent amount of tackles here. And I think either Paris Johnson or Skoronski makes a lot of sense. But what I personally think is they're looking for a right tackle. And I think Skoronski is a little bit better, in my opinion, right now. And I think he might not be better as a pass blocker, but he's much better as a run blocker. And I think he fits that right tackle a little bit better. I think Paris Johnson is a solid player, but Skoronski is going to go at 8 for me to the Atlanta Falcons. Now, the Cardinals traded down from 3 to 9. Jalen Carter is still sitting there at 9. And this right here, I think, is where Jalen Carter ends up going. Because this is a guy they might have taken at 3 without all the off-field issues. Now that they traded down, they have extra picks to make more trades. Oh, I think I'm going to take back everything that I just said and go Christian Gonzalez here because the Cardinals have nothing at corner. And that's really, a big, big thing here. And I know that this corner class is very deep, but they could use 2 in the draft realistically. And now that they have all the extra picks, they might even be able to trade back up into the first or stay where they're at and get a defensive lineman. So I'm going to go with Christian Gonzalez here at 9, mainly because of the reason that the Eagles would likely go corner right there, and you snipe them. So with that being said, what would the Eagles do? And there's a lot that they could do here. I honestly would have the Eagles taking Jalen Carter here, but they just really do not need him at all, realistically. They have, honestly, too much at defensive line. They had to, get rid of Javon Hargrave. But the real problem is they really need corner also, but at the same time, they really need a safety. And I don't really see anybody moving up here because, honestly, at this point, if you're Philadelphia, you're probably looking to move down. I mean, honestly, on this Eagles team, defensive backs are easily the weakest part of the entire team. So I think you'd have to go ahead and reach on a corner. And the real question is who? Because there is a lot here. Brian Branch would be solid. Deonte Banks, Joey Porter. The only problem with it is I don't know if any of these guys would actually go top 10. That's kind of the problem I'm having with myself is, Bijan here at 10 would make a lot of sense. And the problem is it would be more of like a luxury pick, but the Eagles do have another first round pick. I think I'm going to do it. Because if you think about it, they're going to get another corner with that other first-round pick and then either get another DB, safety, or corner with their second-round pick here. Honestly, it's either reach on a corner or take probably a top 5 talent in this draft. And I'm going to take Bijan Robinson here at 10. And hear me out. The reason I do this is because of the fact that the Philadelphia Eagles are not looking to re-sign Miles Sanders. Obviously, they have some solid running backs out there, but with Jalen Hurts, you want a really, really good running back because then it'll help his running game and your passing game with play actions, RPOs, reads, all that kind of thing. Bijan Robinson is a top 10, top 5 talent in this class, period. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I don't think reaching on a corner makes a lot of sense when you could go get a guy like Bijan who could literally transform your offense next year. When you are already one of the best rushing offenses in the league, now you could have the best running back and one of the best quarterbacks and one of the best receivers with the best offensive line. Whoo, baby. And this is one of those things where usually in my mocks, Bijan does not get drafted very high. But with the fact that the trades that happened, it sort of screwed up the board a little bit to where they kind of felt it was either reach on a corner or take him. And at that point, it feels almost too obvious what they should have done here. Now, at 11, we have the Tennessee Titans sitting here. The Titans are kind of in a weird spot because they need receiver very badly, they need tackle very badly, and they need edge very badly. And those are all positions that you could get realistically here at 11. My thing is, I think they would value, or I value, offensive line over the other positions because without a good O-line, you're kind of in a bad spot. And I think the real problem is we don't know what they're really doing yet, and I'm going to go ahead and assume the Titans are full-on rebuilding from what I've heard. Derrick Henry's likely to go. Ryan Tannehill's likely to go. It could be Malik Willis's team next year. So I really do think that they would go O-line. Yeah, they don't really have a starting tackle right now on their team at all. So I'm going to go ahead and get them Paris Johnson, I think, here at 11. And I like that pick because they're more of in a rebuild mode than a retool or refresh. So they're kind of building from scratch. And when you're doing that, you want to build in the trenches first. And Paris Johnson from Ohio State can play almost any offensive line position, probably other than center. So I think worst case scenario, you get a very, very good guard. Best case scenario, you get a very, very good tackle. Now, at 12, the Houston Texans are back up. And they went with Mr. They went with Mr. Anthony Richardson with their first selection. Now, the question is, do they go Jalen Carter? It would make a lot of sense. It's a solid fit. I think the issue, again, is the off-field stuff. But when it comes down to it, he's probably a top 3 talent in this draft. And I think if you're Houston, you're looking at what you just did with Anthony Richardson at 2 and Jalen Carter at 12, and you're pretty damn happy, in my opinion. because Jalen Carter, like I said, is a great player. He's got some off-field concerns, of course, but on the field, he's a freaking beast, so I would go for that. Here at 13 with the New York Jets, I think offensive line with them, too, is a very big need. I'm not sure what the bigger need would be, tackle or guard. So I'm going to give them a guy that could probably play both, but is more of a tackle, and I'm going to go Broderick Jones here at 13. I just think that if, and most likely, the Jets will get Aaron Rodgers. So surrounding him with a good offensive line, they already have some good receivers. I would go Quentin Johnston here if they had a very good offensive line, but it definitely needs some help. So we go tackle here to help bolster that. And Mekhi Becton, I don't know if you guys have seen, he looks really good right now. Seems like he's lost quite a bit of weight, so he'll be able to move a lot better at that left tackle position. So getting a guy to go play on the other side of him is probably a really good idea. And now you have two really good tackles on either side of Aaron Rodgers. Now with the 14th pick, this is a tough one, I think, because there's a lot of different ways that the Patriots could go. They could go receiver, they could go offensive line, they could go defensive line, they could go corner. There's a lot of different things they could do. So right here, I think a corner would make a lot of sense for New England. But I also think receiver could be a really good spot for them to go. And I really do like Quentin Johnston. I feel like he would fit what they're looking for in receiver with what they've signed in free agency lately. I think corner is a little bit less on their board of like, we need to get great corners, because Bill's kind of the guy that can coach up corners. Can't really coach up receivers, so I'm going to go ahead and get Quentin Johnston here for the Patriots. Get Mac Jones a real legit wide receiver one, and just see how good they can do with that in place. So here at 15, I think the Packers really need defensive line help, and I think a guy like Kalijah Kancey or Lucas Van Ness would make a lot of sense there. I do think they do need edge a little bit more than interior D-line, so that makes me lean Lucas Van Ness. But I do like Kalijah Kancey there as well, and putting Kancey next to a guy like Kenny Clark would be a really good idea. But I think they're going to go with Lucas Van Ness here because he is a little bit better fit. It makes a little bit more sense. And then Washington here, this one's really tough too because they have a decent amount of needs. I think O-line's a pretty big need for them in corner as well. And I do think that corner is the biggest need for this team. Really right here, I'm torn between Joey Porter and Deonte Banks. But I think based on the fact that Joey Porter is a little bit more loved in terms of, nationwide, I think I'm going to take Porter here. I do love Deonte Banks, don't get me wrong, but I think Joey Porter makes a lot of sense here at 16. And then at 17, I do think they need corner really badly. They could use a D lineman, but I do think they need O-line the most, and specifically tackle. I do like a guy like Dwan Jones. Osiris Torrance could make some sense there because he plays guard, but they also need guards. I would say, though, they clearly need tackle more than a guard. So if I were to go O-line, I would probably pick Anton Harrison here, which I'm leaning towards definitely right now. I do like Dwan Jones, but I think Harrison is a little bit better right now. So I'm going to go with Harrison to the Pittsburgh Steelers just because I think they really do need tackle, and he is the best tackle on the board right now, I believe. And here we are back with the Lions at pick 18. Now, this is where I think it gets a little fun. So the Lions picked Devin Witherspoon earlier at 6 overall. They still could use another corner, which I'm not going to take 2 corners in the first round, that's for sure. We do need defensive line. Mozzie Smith could make some sense here, but that I feel like a little early for him. Linebacker could make some sense, but I don't see that happening necessarily. So I do think Kalijah Kancey is the obvious pick here. I'm not the biggest Kancey fan by any means, but when you can add a guy like Kancey to a defense that already has some pretty solid pass rushers, I think you're in a good boat because Kancey is one of the best interior pass rushers in this class, if not the best, behind Jalen Carter, of course. But he's got some stuff you can't teach. He's got ridiculous speed. I think he's only 280, 285, But that's not the worst size when it comes to a D lineman like that. So I think Kancey here makes a lot of sense. He's a good fit. And yes, he might not be a 3-down player, but I think he's a 2-down player at least. So I take him at 18 and help bolster this defense a little bit more. And now the Lions are looking a lot better than they were before this draft. So pick 19 with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This one's really tough, I think. This one's really tough because of the fact that there's so much here. I think there's so much talent still left on the board, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. I honestly think corner or safety or offensive line could make a lot of sense here. Brian Branch would be a really good player. I think Nolan Smith might be solid. I think he's a really good player as well. This one's really tough because they do need offensive line pretty badly. They need a left tackle specifically. They don't have that right now, but they could also use a guard. They could also use corner or safety. I think it just depends on what they do in free agency. But right now, I'm going to go ahead and take the most value, I think, which is Dawand Jones at tackle. I do love the other players, and they are probably better players at their position. But at the position of left tackle or right tackle, you can't really just employ anybody. Dawand Jones is a beast, big as hell. He's got basically everything you'd look for as a tackle in terms of size. Now, putting it on the field is a little bit different. He's a solid guy, probably not the best tackle in the. I mean, obviously he's not the best tackle in the class, but I'd say he's top 5. But there's some people who believe he's more like 6, 7, 8. So it really just depends on what you believe. But I think right here he makes quite a bit of sense. So here at 20, we have the Seattle Seahawks, who already got Will Anderson at the edge position. I think they could go interior offensive line. That would make a lot of sense here. So you know what? I think because this is such a deep corner class, I would go corner here, but I think they're going to go offensive line, and they're just going to take the best offensive lineman available, which in my opinion is O'Cyrus Torrence. I know he's a guard, and picking guard at 20 is not a bad value, but you'd want to look at other positions first. But I do think guard is one of the biggest positions of need, offensive line in general. If you could get an offensive lineman, period, I think it would be good for the Seattle Seahawks. So I just think that makes a lot of sense, and it helps bolster them up front for the Geno Smith era here in Seattle. Now, the Chargers are on the clock. This one's tough because I could see them going receiver. Realistically, I could see them going tight end here. I could see them going defense. A lot of different things they could do. I don't see them going corner because they already have a decent amount of capital put into that position. I could see them going safety because they don't really have the best safeties. Brian Branch could make some sense. But I really do think their two biggest needs are defensive and offensive line. And this is the type of team where you have a great quarterback, so of course you want to protect him as much as you can, but there's not a lot left here at offensive line. But the guys like Brian Bresee are still available. Nolan Smith, of course, like I mentioned already. Will McDonald wouldn't be bad. Mozzie Smith wouldn't be horrible. I think if there were a good tackle here, you'd go with them. But because there isn't really a great tackle left, I know the guy from Tennessee is pretty good. But I'm not taking him at 21 here if I'm the Chargers. Maybe I will. That might not be a bad pick. Because I think offensive line is your biggest need when you have a really good quarterback. Really, no matter what, you want to protect him. But then again, defensive line was a pretty big issue last year, specifically interior defensive line. And I think a guy like Brian Bresee could come in and really make a big difference. The problem is, you know what? I think I'm going to go tackle here because I think there's enough D linemen that are available right now that you could take a guy like Darnell Wright this early, just because it is such a big position of need and such a big position of value that there's so many good defensive linemen in this class. You could probably wait on that a little bit. Here at 22, though, this is kind of where stuff gets weird. So like I said before, I think Baltimore will retain Lamar Jackson. And with that being said, I think they'd want to go out and get him another receiver. I could see them going receiver. I could see them going corner. There's a few different places I could see them going. But with the fact that JSN is here, I think, man, Deonte Banks is really good. Like, that's the issue, is there's so many good defensive players available that it makes me not want to take offense. But because there is so many good defensive players available, it makes me want to take offense because they're going to be gone. So with that being said, I think the real problem here is Baltimore would be between Deonte Banks and Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think receiver is their biggest need right now, and I think they've been clear that they're going to keep trying to go for that. And with the fact that JSN could be an elite receiver at the next level at certain things, I think they would take him here. Give Lamar a little bit more, see if he can actually sling it. I mean, I think he can, but apparently they don't. So see what's going on. And then if he's not going to work out, you got a really good receiver for the next guy. Now, Minnesota is on the clock. They have a lot of issues. They've had to get rid of a lot of players. But one name comes to mind here a lot, and it's Nolan Smith. Deonte Banks would make a lot of sense too, but I really like the fit of Nolan Smith in Minnesota. And unfortunately, they desperately need corner. I would go Nolan Smith here, but I'm going to go Deonte Banks because they have nothing at corner. And Deonte Banks is a very good player. So I think this might be one of the biggest steals in the first round right now with Banks at 23. But here at 24, we have the Jaguars, and they need offensive line and DBs. I think it's pretty close. They need offensive line and DB pretty much the same amount. But I think offensive line is a dwindling position right now, in the draft, that is. So I'm going to go with Steve Avila, the guard from TCU. I think he could play guard or center, and maybe even tackle in a pinch. But I do think that he would be an immediate upgrade over what they have right now at left guard. And I just, like I said, I don't see... There's a lot of offensive linemen gone, not very many left, and there's a lot of DBs available. So you kind of got to take the value position here. And then the Giants here at 25, they desperately need a receiver, but they could use a lot of other positions too. I would go Nolan Smith here, but they did just take Kayvon last year in the first round. They don't necessarily need DB very badly. Receivers clearly their number one need. I'm going to go with Zay Flowers here to New York. I don't love it, but I don't hate it. I feel like Zay is a very good player. He adds kind of what they need over there. They need more of like a shifty guy that can get some run after catch with Daniel Jones. I like I said, I don't love it, but I don't hate it. So I'll take Zay Flowers there. 26, the Dallas Cowboys. They need defensive line pretty bad. They need linebackers pretty bad. And I think the clear number one prospect for the Cowboys right now would be Nolan Smith. They really need edge players. They also need interior D-line, but I think edge is a bigger need right now. They could use a safety, but I do think Nolan Smith is, in my opinion, probably the best player on the board right now. I just think he's going to be a beast at the next level. So putting him across from DeMarcus Lawrence, and then he will eventually take over for DeMarcus Lawrence, makes a lot of sense in my opinion. With Buffalo at 27, Brian Branch makes so much sense for them at 27 because they need DB desperately. They're probably going to lose Jordan Poyer, and they kind of need corner as well. Yeah, I'm going to take Brian Branch here at 27 to the Bills just because of the fact that they desperately need safeties. And I think, Poyer's going to leave this year, and even if he doesn't, Micah Hyde isn't very young either. So two very old safeties, and getting a guy like Brian Branch at 27 I think is really good value as well. So I'm definitely happy with that pick if I'm Buffalo. Cincinnati is kind of in a weird spot too because they always will need offensive linemen, it seems like. But they do need a lot on the defensive side of the ball too. So I could definitely see them going defense, but I think they're going to go O-line, and it's going to be Luke Whippler from Ohio State, the center. I think that center is their number one need on the offensive line, and getting a guy like Joe Burrow, finally some blocking help would be really good. I know they tried over this past offseason. It got better, but it still isn't great. I think adding a guy like Whippler up front really helps that. And center being their number one position of need, I think that makes a lot of sense. For the Saints here, I think Brian Bresee is kind of the obvious pick, in my opinion. I think a guy like, Myles Murphy could make some sense too, or Mozzie Smith. But I do think Brian Bresee would be solid. I think I'm going to go with Bresee here for New Orleans. I think that makes a lot of sense. And then Philly, like I said before, they took Bijan at the 10th overall pick, which means they really need corners. And I think a guy like Tyrique Stevenson, Garrett Williams could make some sense. I don't really like these. I'm not a big fan of how they have the rankings on PFF, but Cam Smith would be solid. I'm not a big Emmanuel Forbes guy. He's only 166 pounds. Really scares me there. And he's not he's got some speed, but he's not ridiculously fast to the point where he could legit put on 30 pounds and not really lose much in terms of speed. That really scares me as a NFL corner. 166 just isn't going to cut it. I like Tyrique Stevenson here. I like Cam Smith here. I like Garrett Williams here. I think I'm going to go with Tyrique. I really am a big fan of Tyrique from Miami. I think he's like 6 foot 6'1". He's not super tall, not super long, but he's got some good speed. He's got good coverage ability, got good hips. I think he's a solid player. And I would say he might be in my top 5 corners. I'll have to do more of a deep dive to really get down to that. But I like Tyrique a little bit more than most, I think. And then at 31, the final pick in the first round of the NFL draft, the Kansas City Chiefs are on the clock, and they need a lot of help at a few different